Hey outside world, one of the questions that comes up in Ask a Lawyer sometimes is, when am I entitled to assign counsel or a lawyer appointed by the court? Some things are nationwide because of Supreme Court cases that have set the law of the land, and then some other things are state specific. In general, here in New York and across most of the rest of the U.S., if you are accused of a crime, you are entitled to an appointed lawyer if you cannot afford one. It's basically part of the rights they give you in your Miranda rights, which Miranda is an important case. I would recommend anyone with an interest in criminal law to look up. And at the same time, if you're interested in criminal law, you want to read Gideon v. Wainwright or the book Gideon's Trumpet, which goes into a lot more detail on the people, the arguments before the Supreme Court, and the whole strategy that went into it. The short of it is, if you're looking at an offense, if you're charged with an offense that carries jail time, usually you need to be provided with a lawyer. This is based in constitutional law and your right to counsel. In most cases, you have the right to have an attorney. It doesn't necessarily mean one gets appointed for you. That's a specific subset. The right to counsel just means you don't have to go it alone. You have the right to have an attorney accompany you. What happened after that was some things were found to be serious enough, the process, the procedures, the issues complex enough that lawyers were needed to help people properly navigate it and for things to be fair. If there's a lawyer on one side of the case that knows about evidentiary rules and objections and the process of laying a foundation with a witness, and the other side doesn't know, it's not a fair fight. So the idea is, for the most important of cases, which are seen as imprisonment by the state of an individual, you have the right to an attorney, and if you can't afford one, they'll appoint one for you. Now, what does an appointed lawyer mean? A lot of places have a public defender's office where someone accused of a crime will fill out an application, have an interview, go through some process, and if they're found eligible, they get appointed to the PD's office. PDs generally tend to be overworked, but they know this law inside and out. So there's a balance there. If you have the funds to hire an attorney, retain a private attorney, they may have the same level of experience and they may have all the time you could buy from them, but it's not cheap. There are certainly instances where retaining is a very good idea, and there's any number of instances where the public defenders aren't just sufficient, but they're very good at their jobs. People always talk about public pretenders when they're mad at the public defender, but the reality of the situation is a lot of people who are complaining would have been getting time anyway, and they're just taking out their anger on someone because they're not happy the way it went. When I was doing assigned counsel work, I rarely had someone who was innocent of the charges. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not going to get into details. But when they arrest you, in the pawn shop with your neighbor's TV, there's an issue there. The defender isn't necessarily going to make the greatest amount of difference in that case, barring some technicality, some amazing defense, some claim from out of nowhere. The majority of criminal stuff, while not open and shut, is relatively straightforward. It's not nearly as complex as you see on TV. A lot of it is someone caught with drugs, caught with stolen property, caught with whatever on their person. The backstory, the rationales, the reasons may be more complex. Their goals and hopes for what happens are usually very complex, but in general, the lawyering itself is not the highest level of jurisprudential discourse, which I don't even know if is a real term, and I'm sure I butchered it, but just trying to get the point across in the little time I have left before my lunch break. So, if you're accused of a crime where you're looking at jail time, you're probably entitled to assigned counsel. This also applies in different states have different names for these courts, but if you're in like a family court proceeding where there's the potential of jail time, say you're being brought into court for failure to pay support and technically you could be put in jail for it, quite often there's a right to counsel there. In some other proceedings, there are right to counsel and the possibility of assigned counsel. They vary. Custody and visitation here in New York, you're usually going to get a lawyer, in part because with any of these cases, family, criminal, whatever, the appointment of a lawyer helps to even the playing field, make it more of a fair process, to help everyone involved navigate the system. So in something that's contentious like a family court matter where people's rights to their children are up in the air, quite often lawyers will be appointed to help the parties, but also to help the court, because it helps streamline things, keep the case moving. The parties themselves may not be familiar with all the lingo and the paperwork and the procedural deadlines, so the lawyers help navigate that. So, this was me talking to you about questions some of you have asked about what assigned counsel is, what a public defender is, and when you're entitled to one. I hope this gave some basic information to help, and if there's anything else outside world, ask a lawyer.